Magnus Carlsen went into the final day of the Fischer random match against Hikaru Nakamura with a 2-point lead. However, Nakamura had given himself a chance by winning that final game. And really it was like the match was starting afresh, because on this final day the time control changed. They played 8 games with a shorter time control, 10 minutes each, with 5 seconds added per move. So here's the first of those 8 games. You can see that in this starting lineup the queens are in the corner, so that's really quite unusual. And Carlsen made sure that, well, he was trying to activate his queen from the word go, and you'll have noticed throughout this match that Carlsen is really attuned to the position of his queen, particularly in relation to his opponent's king. More so than Nakamura, that's been my impression. So e6, now might have been better just to block that pawn, and Carlsen strode forward with a5. So that potentially gives the queen a little bit more room, but I think the most important thing is it rather cramps Black's queen actually. And well, Nakamura played a6, but this doesn't look like a beautiful setup to me, you know, as White has already gained space. So I mean, it's very hard to determine what's going on in this game. And well, Nakamura's next move really set the tone for this blitz match. He played knight f6, and of course, it's a kind of Alekhine defence, or in the spirit of Alekhine defence, tempting that pawn forward. But of course, it's very risky to play in this way. But this, as I said, set the tone for the match and was typical of what we're going to see in this match, with Nakamura playing very quickly, playing very enterprisingly, playing very risky chess, and Carlsen playing very steadily. These are their styles. So here, for example, one could perhaps try to push these pawns forward. Got to be careful about d4. There's could be a rather irritating check. I mean, it's not the end of the world. But yeah, Carlsen just didn't get involved. Played knight e3, traded that off. It's got a very sound pawn structure, that's nice. It's gained some space on the queen side. And of course that lets out the queen to some extent, looking across the board. So at this moment, well, it looks to me as though Carlsen has a very pleasant position. But knight c6 was a good move, because that allows the pawn to advance, which can potentially let out the queen. Because if Carlsen takes, then that brings the rook into the game, attacking the b4 pawn. And now Carlsen castled, so this king is going to end up here, and the rook will switch over. So here, watch, here we go. Fantastic. As someone pointed out in the comments, I do enjoy these really long castles. They just look so bizarre to me. But anyway, and Nakamura castled, not quite so spectacular. So the queen is still a little bit out of play, but the rooks are connected. d4 from Carlsen, bishop h5, and queen d2. So I think Carlsen toying with the idea of playing c4 to open up the queen side, but Nakamura stops that straight away. Now the only problem is that queen is a bit blocked in by that, but well, the king can step out to e7 very easily. But here I think actually the position is about equal. Even though that queen is way across the other side of the board, as I said, it can come out, and actually Black's structure is very good here. He's got rid of his light square bishop. And here I was really surprised that Nakamura didn't trade bishops. I mean, that seems like a very natural way to go. I suppose the rook is reasonably placed here, but he played rook d7 straight away, and Carlsen ran away with the bishop, and then bishop g5, h6, bishops are exchanged, and rook h6. So I think, from a positional point of view, Nakamura has straightened out his pawns, has a nice pawn clump there. Yes, this rook is a little bit active, but if Nakamura had played the right move here, if he'd played rook d6, he'd have been absolutely fine. And then king b7, and the queen comes into the game. Probably this will be exchanged off. Well, I certainly don't think black is worse in that position. But it looks a bit odd to put the rook on d6, I must confess. And when you're playing quickly, and Nakamura was playing very, very quickly, well, rook e7 looks more natural. It's a blitz game. You can't analyse everything. And he had overlooked the force of e4. This is incredibly strong. And suddenly Carlsen takes the initiative while the queen is stuck way across in the corner. So this was the game continuation. Queen g5. And black simply doesn't have time to bring his king out. Well, Nakamura played king b7, but after d5 he is hopelessly lost. The knight can't move because queen takes rook. Nakamura took on d5 and simply rook takes c6, removing the guard of the rook, and white is just a piece up, and Carlsen finished the game very neatly. Let's just see it, because we have a nice checkmate at the end. The queen slides in, and a very simple piece sacrifice. So threatening queen b7 mate. Black defends that, but now after a6, Nakamura resigned. Let's just see the end. So rook d6. We'll give a check. There's just a neat finish here. And now we give a rook, we give the pawn, and we slide in with rook number 2. Thank you very much. Checkmate. So a very simple victory actually for Carlsen. But I mean, of course, it was a clear blunder from Nakamura. But actually, I think it seems to me that he'd given himself a lot of practical difficulties right from the word go by allowing his queen to be rather squashed in. Remember, they don't have too much time to reflect, you know, in these 10-minute games. Okay, what about game number 2? Well, to some extent, it followed the contours of game 1 in the sense that Carlsen, well, I think Carlsen basically outplayed Nakamura in this game. And had a positional advantage. So around about here you can see that Carlsen has the better pawn structure. Carlsen has black here, so all one pawn island. He's playing against this isolated pawn. He has nice blockade. The knight stand very well, the king stands well. Of course, Nakamura is pretty solid, and in the end Carlsen couldn't quite break through. It wasn't a spectacular game, but Carlsen had a positional advantage. I think that's the story of that one. But a draw in the end. Okay, moving on to game 3. This was an incredible game, a very long game. So if you'll forgive me, I'm going to come in right at this moment. Hikaru played an excellent game. Played very quickly. He had a time advantage. He had a positional advantage. He broke through and won Carlsen's queen, but Carlsen defended so doggedly. It was quite extraordinary. And we arrive at the position after 78 moves. Nakamura had a time advantage. He's got queen against rook and pawn. Now that pawn is going in this direction, so Carlsen is defending for his life here. He was also incredibly short of time, practically playing on increment. Just playing, you know, getting the 5 seconds each time he made a move, but going right down to 0 again. And here, well, Nakamura must have thought he'd won the game. He gave a check. Of course, if the rook interposes, then we have queen a1 checkmate. Carlsen played king a2, and Nakamura banged out queen c2 check, checking the king, hitting the pawn. And he assumed if rook b2, then queen takes a4 check, and we have, well, a pretty simple finish of queen against rook. But Carlsen spotted king a3. Of course, that means if queen takes rook, it's a draw, stalemate. And that little trick seemed to throw Nakamura, because suddenly, you know, he looked frustrated. He was shaking his head. His heart monitor jumped up. Carlsen was defending so coolly. It's incredible. His heart rate was, well, of course, increased by this stage, but significantly lower than Nakamura's. And he looked so calm at the board, and finding only moves. Now, this game went on for some time. The winning method is complicated. I'm not even going to go there. I've got a hangout tomorrow night, and if you want to have a look at it there, I'll show it to you. But I'm just going to show you very quickly the course of the next few moves. Basically, white king is blocked out, and once the pawn got to a3, in fact, this is now even a theoretical draw. Nakamura had to stop that. And he could make no progress. Basically, nothing much happened, although Nakamura tried over the next 50 moves. He even managed to get his king eventually down to c1. But yeah, it happened over these moves. But that didn't help at all. And Carlsen found only moves, and after, well, 50 more moves, basically, Carlsen, I think, claimed a draw by repetition rather than 50 moves. And anyway, the arbiter upheld the claim, and this game ended in a draw. Unbelievable defence from Carlsen. I think if Nakamura had managed to win that game, then he might have had a chance in the match. But that was a real confidence booster for Carlsen. Game 4. It seemed to me that after that game, Hikaru was on tilt. He was really going for it. So here's the starting position, starting lineup of game 4. C4 from Carlsen. And now, blink and you'll miss it, Nakamura castled. I mean, it's incredible you can do this at the start of the game, but you can. It just meant that the king of the rook swapped places. So watch, here we go. And Carlsen decides to do the same. Incredible. Incredible this is actually legal in the position. So, the game went like this, e5. And we have the kind of contours of a kind of King's Indian, Old Indian position. I mean, there's no fianchetto here, so it's a kind of Old Indian with this structure. So you can see that white has a very pleasant space advantage. And I think this kind of position would be, well, I think Magnus would be very happy with it. And his rook is in the perfect position to advance with f4. So if Hikaru takes here, then you can see this is just beautiful space advantage to white. I mean, this looks like a proper game of chess, or at least it looks like white is playing a proper game of chess, and just looks tremendous. Just need to bring the knight into play and everything is perfect, whereas black's pieces look really, really ugly. So Hikaru came up with an extraordinary plan. He took here, got the knight out, so he wants to take the bishop. Of course the bishop dropped, and now he played f5. If Carlsen trades, then that certainly doesn't look bad for black. You know, trade of queens, recapture on f5, everything's fine. But of course, there is this move, bishop g5. Now, you certainly don't want to retreat the knight rather miserably. I dare say white could simply take and then the knight would be en prise. Nor do you want to play rook d7, because that would mean the f5 pawn would be en prise. So Nakamura simply ditched the exchange. I mean, this is an incredible move, but it just shows the sort of mood he was in. Real all or nothing spirit about his play. So the bishop simply took the rook. And now, well, I mean, at first I was thinking, of course, white should just bring a knight out. But I guess Carlsen didn't want the insecurity of having to deal with knight h4 and potentially a queen g5. You know, this bishop can sometimes leap into play as well. These blitz games, I call them blitz games, they're only 10 minutes on the clock. They're all about the initiative. If you have the initiative, that's incredibly important. So Carlsen wanted to wrest that back with e5 and to just open up the position for this bishop, for example, and the rook here. Queen came out and knight d4. So this is the whole point. Magnus just wants to bring his pieces into play, and he is the exchange ahead, and doesn't mind giving away a pawn to do that. He is an exchange to the good. Queen e4, so attacking the pawn. Queen goes to the side and the knight comes into play. So even though he's ditched the pawn, his piece is coming out. But Nakamura also wasn't backing down and is fighting for the initiative too. And here c5, I mean, to be honest, I find c5 a really ugly move because it allows the knight in here, but it's all about bringing his pieces out. He wanted to bring his bishop to c6 to protect the pawn. And here Magnus went for the endgame. And, well, by this point, of course, it's still better for white, but black is still playing, still fighting very hard. It's certainly not so clear. And indeed, Nakamura played very quickly, and Magnus couldn't quite control this one, and well, finally they ended up in this position, and the players agreed to a draw here. So after 4 games, Magnus, there have been 3 draws, and Magnus had managed to win 1 of them. Okay, find out in the next video what happened in the final 4 games.